Well, welcome to the AI in Action podcast series, Dean.
Thanks so much, Hannah. I'm happy to be here.
So, what scares you the most about AI?
So, when I think about artificial intelligence, I think I come at this a little differently than some of the predetermined camps that people out there already fall into, because they're sort of the safety now folks who are worried about, the things that could happen to you today or tomorrow. They're worried about cybersecurity. They're worried about deep fakes. They're worried about disinformation. They're worried about other safety risks. Like teaching people how to make weapons or convincing people to harm themselves. And those are all very real. I'm not writing those off. There are also the sort of long-term, what people sometimes call doomers, killer robots, artificial intelligence, taking over the government, become humans sort of losing their grip on the leash. And I find myself sort of in the middle where I think like in a sort of 10 to 20 year time frame, what's going to happen to our society as a result of how we choose to deploy this technology? So we get a choice, right? It's not fatalistic or built into the tech. It depends on how people choose to use it, how it's made available to consumers, what regulations we adopt, what choices developers make. And so the things I worry about in that domain have more to do with concentration of power. And I think of that in terms of both concentration of wealth and concentration of knowledge. I want to stress that I don't think knowledge is the same as information, right? People think about LLMs as really having democratized information. You can teach yourself a lot using artificial intelligence if you take the time. Knowledge comes from sort of structured learning, right? You access information, but you need to be able to interpret it and use it, and it takes time and effort. And the barriers that LLMs remove for accessing information, it doesn't really remove for building and creating learning or knowledge. And so, what happens if because of the way we implement artificial intelligence, say in schools, or if it leads to us devaluing higher education. What happens if we make information widely available, but learning becomes more difficult or less well funded, or we simply don't value it as much because we don't think we need human knowledge because now we have computer knowledge. Uh, I worry a lot about the longer term kind of decades long implications of that. And you've really got to think like a child born today will be in college or entering the workforce in 18-ish years, and children in elementary school today are already using artificial intelligence, and in a short 10 to 12 years will be adults, and they're going to have a totally different relationship to this technology than you or I will. In the same way that my relationship to social media is different than my mother's, and my relationship to the internet is different than my father's, and their relationship to you know, uh, CDs and VHS tapes is different than mine, right? This is true for every generation, but it means that the shadow of these things is kind of longer than we often think of them. And so, what happens when a whole generation has access knowledge this way? When a whole generation has gone through school at a time when it's trivial to plagiarize a paper and teachers haven't figured out how to police that, right? When cheating on a test is easier than ever, when there are so many more shortcuts. There was a really good paper out of Brookings. They interviewed like 400 educators around the world, and I think this paper was like 170 pages long, something. It's quite detailed, but uh, one of the things that stuck out to me about it was they talk about like the bargain inherent in most education systems is do the work, get the grade, right? And if you can get the grade without doing the work, a lot of students are going to do that. And so what happens in 12 years when that's been the default? I worry about that a lot in the knowledge space. And then, of course, for concentration of wealth, these processes by which we make information widely available, by which AI is integrated into the workplace, maybe it replaces forms of human labor. Many companies are now investing, including NVIDIA, are investing in physical AI, right? Trying to map physical spaces and teach computer systems to navigate those. So it's not just white collar labor, it's also blue collar labor that is at risk of being devalued or substituted by this technology. And so to who do those benefits flow? We have a process by which we're at risk of making information widely accessible, knowledge more narrowly accessible, and redistributing upward gains from technology. And I think that that is kind of over a 15-year horizon what scares me the most. I think that some of the long-term doomer trends are very speculative. I think the AI safety risks today we have are bad but solvable. And I think we really have to be looking around the corner at some of these other questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Dean, your mention of how information does not necessarily equal knowledge. Because I think, in our era when we were coming up and going through school, it was more aligned, I feel like, with,
Mm.
if I researched a paper for college and wrote it, I kind of knew about it, just the process of putting that together. And now I teach part-time
Mm.
in a university, and it's so different. I am the students think I am barbaric because I expect them to read a book and be able to actually answer a question that I do not give them ahead of time in class, like with their own brain. This is so different than
How
what
primitive.
I know. I'm not asking them to write a paper on their own, just answer a question.
Well, I have friends who are professors who have gone back to blue book exams, right? Because
Oh, wow.
they no
Yeah.
longer know how to assign the process of writing a paper in a way that students will meaningfully engage with. And that's just
Oh,
like a different, think about the difference between a multiple choice test and writing a term paper,
yeah.
right? Like you're working your brain in a different way.
Mhm.
There's a reason um people who are really good at trivia are not necessarily always like good at everything, right?
It's true.
Trivia hosts aren't always nuclear engineers or physicists or brilliant social scientists. So that's just a different thing, and we're kind of confusing the two, I think.
Yeah. So what are you hopeful about with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I use AI tools every day. I have a Claude Code subscription. I've been teaching myself to use it and looking actively for use cases. And so I'm not like an AI abolitionist, right? I'm not rejecting that the technology can be useful. I have a Claude Code skill that skims all of the email newsletters I get every morning, and will produce me like a sort of short digest, a 3 to 5 sentence summary of each one, so I can choose which ones to zoom in on. Right? It's doing some reading for me, but it's doing is triage really. I do a lot of writing and editing for work for a site called Tech Policy Press, and we've been encouraged to experiment within certain bounds with AI there, and it's been helpful for things like is this piece in AP style, right? Actually getting really good at that. You still got to do the human work first and after, but as a added layer of quality control, really helpful. Did we name anybody in here uh, who just deserves a chance to comment or who might be legally sensitive, right? I've got to look for that myself. My editor will look for that in between us. Not a bad thing to have Claude look for it too. It's helped me develop a summer work plan because I do a lot of consulting on contract and managing those contracts and juggling them. Um, it takes up a lot of headspace. And so having someone who can access my Google Drive and say, like, these are your big deliverables, here's how much time they might take. I go through and tweak that. It's a collaborative process. It's not doing the work for me, it's doing the work with me. So I really think these tools can be big value adds for people. In my personal life, I garden a lot. And so it will help me identify plants in the garden and then come up with strategies for ones that might be struggling, right? There's a lot of ways people can use this tech that is additive. And that's including, we just talked about the downsides in education. The same Brookings study I mentioned said that, uh, they interviewed a teacher in India who said for gifted students, this is a gift because it means the teacher can give them the opportunity to dive as deep as they want while the teacher goes and helps other students who might not be as far along. So for people who are curious and want to build knowledge, this can be really useful. And it creates capacity where there wasn't before. So I'm not such a the parts of me that are pessimistic are pessimistic about how humans might govern this technology, not necessarily what the tech does itself. There's a great paper from two Princeton academics who write a blog called AI Snake Oil. From the Knight First Amendment Institute, and it's called AI as a Normal Technology. And what they mean by that is humans will choose how to implement this technology over many years. And that will be what cumulatively decides how it impacts our society. So in that way, it's similar to, anything else, right? The railroad, airline travel, electric light. These were all things that we had to make decisions about and that rolled out over time. They weren't, um, the impact wasn't obvious overnight, and they were regulated, and there were long sort of social debates about them. So I think of AI that way more than something that's net good or net bad. It's going to be up to us. And I think there are great ways to use it. I'm not a like I said, I'm not a rejectionist.
So how is AI changing our society? Like, what is it that you're seeing that, hey, this is new, this is different?
One thing we haven't brought up yet, and that I'm doing a lot of writing on, is the opposition to the data center build out.
Mhm.
And I talk to a lot of people in towns across America who are experiencing firsthand the way the economic development process like isn't really built for public input. I mean, there are, and people are going to immediately react to saying that and say, "What do you mean? Every federal grant requires public input at these steps." But by the time the public hears that someone might be building a data center, many towns have already invested in the electric and water hookups for a site of that size, and the public has not noticed, and those public hearings were empty, right? I've served on public commissions where a city staffer has to read out the public notice to an empty auditorium. Uh, so the process we have for public input doesn't always work very well until it's late in the game and the public is incensed. And by then the conversation is very polarized. And sometimes major investments have already been made. But where this leaves people is feeling like that the process isn't for them, that it's not democratic, that they're not represented, and that they're up against these massive, massive corporate interests, which have managed to sort of co-opt in some cases their county or local government officials, and all that they have is their own organizing capacity and spare time to push back. And that's, I think, I mean, on the one hand, inspiring because people are doing it, and I think when people can organize to make change in society, there's always a way to look at that positively, whether or not you agree with the change or not. At least there's people power, and that's important. But on the other hand, the exhaustion and the impact it's having on people's faith in government, I think, um, is a big problem, and it is changing our society on the ground in a very real way right now. We've talked about education and labor already. I think that, like I said, the implications of those are going to be longer term. But I'd love to hear some of your stories working with students. There are so many kind of scary ones that I've heard from people in academia and in high schools that I think we really should be paying attention to.
Yeah, it's interesting how quickly it's disrupting kind of that experience. Like
Mm.
I remember, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, when the internet became like commercially available and survived Y2K,
Mhm,
all of
mhm.
this.
Oh man, we all have the t-shirt, right? I
I
survived
know.
Y2K.
I know. So I remember that being, disruptive, but not as quickly as this. And then I went to college around the time like social media became a thing. Like when I was an undergrad, that's um like MySpace was a thing and Facebook, and it was very disruptive, but for a while it was just kind of in terms of social behavior, somewhat generational. Then it took a while, but this has been startlingly disruptive to education and in a way that is faster than I expected, I think. And then we're just trying to figure out, how do we respond to this? And I think your example with the data center and the processes that go into that, and people aren't aware until so much groundwork's already been laid and kind of the train has left the station. And I think this is just catching a lot of people in a lot of different sectors by surprise. And I don't know, Dean, I mean, to me, it seems like one of the faster moving technologies, at least that are commercially available, that I have witnessed in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, and that we're still on such a learning curve with this technology. It's nowhere
Yeah.
near mature, right? Like companies are now figuring out how to assign token budgets and thinking about whether or not they need to be on a frontier model or building like local open source models. Like there's so many unanswered questions about like what this will look like in 5 years, right? Will OpenAI ever turn a profit, or will that company end up losing ground to more affordable, specialized tools. That's when we talk about concentration of power, like it's not necessarily the people who are powerful now who are going to be the ultimate beneficiaries of that, right? Because we
Mhm.
haven't seen how the tech will change. I was 13 in Y2K. I remember I went when I went to college, I had to have a college email to get a Facebook account.
Yeah.
And that made it really cool. Um,
Yeah.
no one today would ever believe or understand no young person.
I know.
Um, and our first computer in the house was a PC with Windows 1995 on it that we'd gotten from my grandmother. I think we had AOL. Uh, so certainly this is like because we're all already wired, right? We already have devices that can use this tech. It's just to many people a website. Like
Mhm.
that's the presentation to the user. Adoption was, it's the fastest ever digital technology, I think, to in the his fastest adopted digital technology in human history. It's just so accessible in a way that um, many other technologies have not been. And so we're seeing the we're adapting to it in real time, but that doesn't mean that the technology itself is finished being built or developed. We'll see where this goes. I think there are a lot of experiments in like wearable tech that like may or may not go anywhere, but
Yeah.
um, people are still experimenting with like in what ways will this be commercially viable, useful to people, beneficial to society, useful for government. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think kind of the fast-paced operating environment we're all finding ourselves in is really fast. So, and somewhat whiplashy in ways it's hard for us to predict.
And sometimes too fast, right? Like people
Yeah.
have made some really silly mistakes.
Yeah.
Uh, Ones that were foreseeable, and that has been to the AI industry's detriment, right? Because the narrative around AI is crystallized around things like Google telling people to put glue on pizza.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe this, I think we'll talk about some of the misunderstandings probably
Yeah.
later, but
Yeah.
I think that in a way, the fast adoption has not always been to the benefit of innovation and public understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I can pull on that string there as far as what you think people are misunderstanding about AI, can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I went to a great conference in May. It was a Hacks Hackers conference on AI and journalism, and I listened to a talk by ProPublica has a sort of AI fellow, like an AI
Mhm.
engineering fellow, who has done some really interesting stories using AI tools and has thought about how journalists might use these tools productively. And he had this great slide, which was think of like you know, a, a 4-point axis, like a compass. And
Mhm.
he's like, there are a lot of different ways to interact with artificial intelligence and LLMs specifically. One of them is the user interface, the chatbot, right? That's the thing most average consumers are using in the way they interact with technology. It's different than using it for Claude code, different than using it for data analysis or web design. I mean, you can use chatbots to do those things, but it's the least sort of precise way to do it, but it's the most intuitive. And so that makes it actually the worst for work like journalism, which is detail oriented, where accuracy matters, where auditability and trust matter. But it is the simplest to plug into for a user. And so when people think about the capabilities of this tech and the dangers of it, they think about it from the perspective often of the chatbot. What will the chatbot say back? Can I trust it? Will it be dangerous? Will it be biased? Uh, when I first started using AI for one of my stories at Tech Policy Press, my editor said it works best when you give it data and you give it the container in which the data needs to go, and then you let it do the hard part of sort of organizing that data into the container, but you can audit where the data came from, where it went, how those decisions were made. And then you can do things like create web graphics or interactive dashboards or, things that um, used to require sort of like HTML knowledge. And my HTML is pretty rusty. So I was able to, for example, create like a timeline of interactions between different political groups, just by feeding um, URLs from news stories into Claude and then having it output a spreadsheet, right? And then I could go back through the spreadsheet and click the hyperlinks. And I actually learned a lot through this. I would do a better job now, and it would be faster and even more auditable. But it really, you reduce the risk of hallucination. Essentially, if the data set's small enough to be human audited, which this one was, you eliminate the risk of hallucination, right? Because you fact check it, and you've given it's not going to make up links because you have given it the links, and you've given it the structure of the data. And so there are ways, and you can get much more advanced in this, obviously, but this is why at the beginning of this year, there were so many articles about the AI vibe shift, right? It's because people were realizing that like using AI not to produce human content, but to produce computer readable content, in some ways is more reliable and more of a value add than the sort of unreliable intern that people have been using LLMs as before. I don't know. How have you used it? If at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm still kind of playing around with it, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. I have my go-tos that kind of fit into like my workflow. I mean, it certainly helps me with like organizing things, brainstorming, editing. I got tickled at your gardening example. So I have horses and a farm, and so I use it for similar things. And it's like it's so, if I need to fix a tractor engine, Chat GPT's phenomenal with that. So like stuff I would have never been able to pull off before. Um, but it doesn't feel as like integrated. I feel like my brain
Mm.
has like it has to shift gears to kind of integrate it in, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of like two different modes. It's like the brain that's going to problem solve and be creative and like kind of my own intuition and my own experiences. And then there's like, I got a 400-page proposal I have to read through and I got 15 minutes. It's great for that. Like,
Yeah.
bottom line up front, what do I need to know? What would disqualify me from this work? Like, it's super helpful for that.
Yeah, I've got a 50 page court ruling.
Okay,
I need you to
yes.
find me the paragraph where they say
Yes,
this,
yes.
right? It is a better search engine than search engines.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You remember like learning, I mean, forever ago, but learning how to do like academic research. Like
Yeah.
when, like for me at the time, I remember thinking, oh, wait, peer reviewed. This is what this means. Wikipedia is not a source, like something like that. And it's like, it kind of like shifts how you think about, kind of like filtering through all this information. I feel like AI for me has been almost that kind of like a mental exercise or like phase, I guess, in learning like, how do I use this in a way that's not just a bunch of hallucinations, telling me to like put the wrong stuff in my tractor I'm trying to repair, like something like that. But it's a process. I've done a lot of different courses and I've tried different things. It has not been one thing that like makes
Mm.
me feel really like, oh yeah, I got this. It's very much kind of a moving target. And I feel like every week I'm learning something different. And then like what it works, for me. I mean, it's great reviewing those massive documents. It's great when I need to substitute something in the banana bread that I'm baking, and my cookbook doesn't have it in there. But I'm also finding that there's aspects that it just doesn't do. It just doesn't
Mm.
go. And I think here lately, that's something I've just been really noticing of like, okay, what does it really mean to be human? Like the things that maybe I discounted before because it's like AI is dropping the ball on this. This is a distinctly us characteristic.
What have you found? Do you have an example?
Yeah. So for me, things like inspiration,
Mm.
that's really good humor, encouragement, really good like criticism or feedback. that stuff I just have not found kind of being replaced with AI. Not in the same way as if I call up a mentor or a colleague and get them to weigh in on something. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah. And those are things, honestly, Dean, I think I didn't appreciate before AI became so prolific, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because your audience for anything you're writing is actually not in LLM. I mean, some people do write
Yeah,
for LLMs now. They try to get the LLMs to pick it up, but typically you write for your peers, and so
right.
their feedback is invaluable. It is
Mhm.
the audience. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. I think I mean, I have used it to brainstorm, but
Yeah.
um, it's kind of, it's kind of mediocre by design, right? Because
Yeah.
you're working with aggregated data, and so it's not ever going to be at or beyond the cutting edge
Mhm.
of, especially in writing or social sciences. I
Mhm.
know in biology or physics, people are using it to really push envelopes, but for what I do and for what you do, it can help you organize thoughts. But if you try to outsource your thinking to it, uh, I think that's both where it loses value and it can be dangerous to you, right? Like
Mhm.
the sort of cognitive surrender thing is very real. You have to find ways to use it that, Ezra Klein wrote about this, right? And he specifically cited another writer who has a Substack on how he uses AI in his writing process. And I can't remember his name, but like which parts of this process will I not give up, right? Like
Yeah.
where is my value add versus what's the stuff I was just doing by hand before because you had to
Yeah.
crank the car.
Hmm.
Um, and like in education and other domains, like that's where we're going to have to sort this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think AI has the potential to impact democracy?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the faith in democracy piece a little bit earlier. Sam Woolley, who I think you had on this podcast, and
Hmm.
I actually wrote a piece for the Journal of Democracy last fall, which has done like many articles on this and since done some ones that I think go a little deeper into facets of our argument. But we were looking at kind of three what we called medium term trends for the impact on democracy. And one was this concentration of wealth piece. And that's not just, I mean, that speaks to a sort of unfairness in our society that people understand inherently. But when you think about democracy and how it has developed in the modern era and what it does, there's a sort of bargain struck, right, between like elites with large amounts of capital and democratic society. And the bargain is that we need an educated workforce for our businesses to succeed, right? We being the moneyed elites of whom I am not one, but I imagine them saying this. Um, they need that educated workforce, right? You can't run Meta or SpaceX
Hmm.
or Amazon without um, smart workers, and that gives those workers bargaining power, right? They have the ability to say, okay, but we're going to have institutions that check your power, that regulate your companies, that protect our environment, that protect our rights in the workplace. Some countries have done these things better than others, but that's sort of the economic bargain that most democracies have struck. And when you diminish that bargaining power of the knowledge of the middle class sort of educated worker, you increase the power of the capital holding elite. And so is there a way in which AI kind of undoes that piece of the democratic bargain? That's a piece of it. We also talked earlier about, like I said, that AI is a better search engine than search engines. Well, the other side of that is that like our kind of model of journalism is based on people being discoverable on Google, right? And if users aren't going to Google and they're not clicking through hyperlinks, then the ad revenue for news media, where's it going to come from? This has already been a problem with social media, and I think just going to get worse with LLMs. And before, there's a sort of information or narrative power that AI companies could gain if they become the number one place people go to for information, because at least for Google or for Meta platforms or Twitter, like they're really they are platforms that host third-party content from users or for news organizations or media outlets or other places. And so they curate that content and they have a lot of power and control over what people read and talk about, but they are not by and large, for the most part, producing that content. The LLMs are, they are doing more than just serving up YouTube videos to you. And so, um, is that a place we want to have such a thin, important bottleneck in our information ecosystem? I do worry about that in the long term. Um, and so there are a lot of the third place is sort of in representative democracy, like when we start doing things like having simulated focus groups of voters using AI or public comment. Any government process that relies on public comment right now is totally short-circuited by the ability to generate a lot of AI comments that don't come from real people or allow huge numbers of real people to generate unique comments with a click. And so they don't need any expertise or time or even real passion or interest in a topic. They can just send a nearly undetectable AI generated script into something. And this has really made those systems harder to use, right? And so there are feedback loops that our democracy depends on between voters and representatives that AI might short circuit, and that's the third kind of long-term trend we worry about. So wealth, information, and representation, I think of as three legs of a stool, and AI has implications for each of them.
Yeah, that's such a great visual. I think it's kind of like a stark contrast. So with AI having so much like concentrated narrative power, and opposed to contrast to what we were dealing with the internet, where it was almost like democratizing a lot of voices. You could do your own website, start publishing your own work. You're recognized, you become a SME, or you have the social media reach. And a lot of people that were, previously or otherwise rather obscure, who couldn't get placement in the big news media, they could have a
Hmm.
voice, they could influence, they could share. And now I've just been seeing big shifts, especially the past few months on even like on my own website is like, I mean, I'm just not getting the traffic. It may come from LLMs on a few things, but it's really just kind of regurgitating some of my publications. It's not like having the same kind of reach. And I think your visual of like the three-sided stool and emphasis there, including kind of that shift in narrative power, is something that a lot of people aren't tracking on, but they're feeling, and they may not know what it is.
Yeah, and we've been feeling it for a while, right? Like
Yeah.
the information, like we may in 50 years look back on this and not think of LLMs as one revolutionary technology, but instead as
Mhm.
part of a 30-year shift in how
Mhm.
like our information and media environment works, right? Like going
Mhm.
back to the development of the internet and then social media and now LLMs. Like I don't think there's a perfect way to structure the news ecosystem, right? And this is something I'd like to spend a little more time next year like immersing myself in because there's some really
Yeah.
fascinating scholarship about it. But like you talked about like the ability of people to be discovered in the era of like big media gatekeepers, right? Like think of
Mhm.
think of like the 50s and the fast talking newspaper men and their fedoras and they're all white and they're all men and uh they sort of tell America what's important.
Yeah.
Um and then that gets completely disrupted by a series of technologies, including talk radio and then the internet, and then social media, which is really just a different way of structuring,
Mhm.
th- you know, how news consumers find things on the internet. Uh, and that does exactly what you said, right? It lets more voices in, but like sometimes there's a balance between like you want democracy, you want a diversity of voices and perspective and opinion, uh, what we've lost is the ability of someone to say like, "Hey, this isn't true," and it's really inflammatory, right? And then there are no sort of consequences for that anymore, right? Or the consequences are much less than they used to be, and it's much easier to cause harm. And so, like in a way, we miss the gatekeepers. And it's not that there are no gatekeepers. The gatekeepers are tech companies, and they have a lot of power, and they make a lot of profit by letting certain content um, do better than others. And their incentives around that are commercial. And the old media incentives were commercial too, but there was a quality sort of control layer that I think we've undervalued. And with LLMs, that we may gain back some of that quality control, but um, we're going back to like an even smaller number of editors. Like every small town in America used to have one or two newspapers. What's going to happen when we have five major frontier LLMs that most consumers use? We're 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 sort of flattening access to information, like I said before, but through a much like has there ever been a number of gatekeepers that small with that much influence over what people read and hear and listen to? Um, so all of these things have trade-offs, is what I'm trying to say. But like the direction we are heading in carries specific risks to democracy that we should be thinking about.
So what safeguards do you think should be in place regarding AI?
Yeah, it's the topic du jour.
I know,
I guess
the
I'll
million
start.
dollar question.
I guess I'll start by saying, like, there's been a lot of news coverage around Mythos, the new Anthropic model, and cyber threats. And I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I am somewhat sympathetic to the view some cybersecurity specialists have that um, when you read that Mythos has uncovered thousands of undiscovered cyber vulnerabilities, that might be a one-time boom because those were pre-existing vulnerabilities just humans had not discovered. It doesn't mean um, that there will be that many new vulnerabilities every week or every year, right? And so at this time next year, it will have discovered the low-hanging fruit. Humans will continue, hacker groups will continue to do cybercrime, with or without Mythos. Um, Now, I haven't used this model because it's not available to the public anymore. I could be uh, proven completely wrong about this, but like that's not the way I think about AI risk, right? Is that the model is going to be so powerful that the White House has to ban its public use. I think about AI risk more from its impact on users, right? So those short-term risks. There was a great John Oliver episode recently about the sort of teen suicide chatbot. I won't call it an epidemic, but the rash of incidents in the news involving mental health and AI chatbots. Some very sad stories. Uh, some examples from that episode that really make you question the ability of AI companies to put in place meaningful safeguards, right? Sometimes um, there are rash decisions that are made to keep users engaged that are avoidable, and some of it's inherent to the technology, right? Like, um, I do think Dario Amodei is probably telling the truth when he says he doesn't know if they can make a jailbreak proof LLM. It's kind of a slippery tech in that way. Um, and some people might say maybe we should be slowing deployment of these tools because of that. There are a lot of This is a really difficult area, right? Like it's similar to the conversation about um, age verification for children on social media. Like, do you want to restrict people's access to information when some of that information can be really helpful, even to minors, and some of that information can be really harmful? What's the best way to strike that balance while preserving privacy and other rights? Uh, so I don't think I have like a great answer about the day-to-day safeguards other than to say that it's complicated terrain, and I'm more worried about them than I am some of the more sensational risks, like some of the ones that come up in national security contexts. On the sort of threats I've described, the medium-term threats, those are governance choices, right? We can choose to have better labor protections. We can choose to have more environmental transparency around where we site data centers. We can choose uh, how we implement artificial intelligence in our education system, if at all. No one's forcing us to do those things, right? I mean, actually, someone is, right? It's your university administrator, or it's um, your state government that decides whether or not to pass certain bills for workplace rights. But as a society and as a species, these are choices we're collectively making. And so, uh, for that kind of threat assessment, it's it's almost not a safeguard on AI. It's a safeguard for what type of society we want to have and whether or not AI helps us get there.
So what do you think an AI empowered future is going to look like for Americans?
I mean, this is a tool that should make your life better and not extract value from you, right? The reason I switched from ChatGPT to Claude about a year ago, probably because ChatGPT went to a ad-supported free model, and I
Mhm.
said, well, I have seen what this has done to the information space when social media pursued that model. I would rather pay my $20 a month and get access to Claude Pro or whatever they call it, and work with that and learn to use that system because I think that these tools have value and they can give value to me, but I don't want to be extracted from, whether that means that a data center is raising my power rates or polluting my air, or whether that means, I think we should have better data privacy laws. I don't love the idea that every interaction I have with Claude can be trained upon, and I've changed the settings to the extent I can to prevent that from happening. But I think we all expect that in 5 years, if there were a discovery that Claude had not been exactly faithful to its terms of service agreements in terms of data collection and training, that the fine that would be levied against them would be a fraction of the money they had made. And so that's not really a deterrent, right? We as Americans have very few data protections. I used to kind of laugh when people would, there'd be a story that China had obtained um, sensitive data on 100 million American citizens or something. I'm like, well, they could have bought it from a data broker on the open market, you know. Or as Americans, our data is just kind of out there. I don't love that. I wish that I actually had more ownership of my online footprint. And I think that goes for artists and creators and writers too, whose work was used to create these models and who in most cases received almost um, no compensation for it. You might remember that there was that, I think it was the New York Times or the Washington Post reported that Anthropic had been destructively scanning books to train Claude, right? They were taking apart the books to scan them more quickly. And I remember reading that article, and someone in the article was quoted as saying, well, at the end of the day, at least they bought the books because other companies just used ebooks or Google Books and didn't pay a cent, and so there were no royalties. Um, it's a little flippant, but it just goes to show you like how much of this is built on um, what some might call copyright infringement, and that devalues the work of whole sectors. And look at like the Screen Actors Guild strikes, where voice actors were like, "Hey, our union needs to stand up and fight for us so that we're not replaced with AI voice models in 5 to 10 years, and that our profession can continue to exist." They already lost out from the advent of internet streaming, right? The union failed to negotiate strong conflicts with Netflix because no one's going to stream all their shows, right? And so now you see voice actors having to find sidelines of income or take on more work because they don't get paid the royalties they used to. And that threat was they saw that threat coming with artificial intelligence and did something about it. And so none of this is to say that there's not value from artificial intelligence, and I don't want the technology to go away, and I do use it, but I want it to be used in ways that uh, make everybody's life better and not ways that where you get a little for giving up a lot to a few people.
That's such a great perspective. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Dean. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on AI in Action series.
Well, thank you. I was happy to do it. It's been a pleasure, and would love to be back sometime.
Awesome.